Hey Chris, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for making time. I wanted to give the parish an opportunity to get to know you the same way they did with Cheryl
Sure.
last week or the week before. So I just have a few questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, so start off by telling us a little bit about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? What were you into?
I grew up in Tulsa. This is where I was born and raised. I was born in St. Francis Hospital at 61st. I was going to say 71st, but 61st in Yale. Yeah, so lived here my whole life. Went to Jinx Public Schools until I graduated from high school, and then went to a couple different colleges for undergraduate. Went to TU for a while and graduated from KU. But other than that, I've lived almost my entire life here in Tulsa.
And so what were you into in high school? Were you into the academic side of things? Did you play sports? What kept you busy?
Not sports. That was not the my gift for sure. So I didn't do that. So academics was kind of the thing I spent most of my time on. And for the first time in the history of the high school, they actually started letting people letter in academics. So you didn't have to play a sport to letter. You could get a letterman's jacket and you could actually get, the letter for the high school. But if you lettered in academics, the little pin that they gave you wasn't a football or a basketball or anything like that. You got the lamp of knowledge. Lamp of
Of
knowledge.
course you did. Obvious.
And if you're kind of sort of a skinny nerd who's focused on academics in high school, getting the lamp of knowledge for your letterman's jacket doesn't help your reputation. That does not that does not keep you from getting the kind of attention that you would normally get.
No extra street cred with that one.
No, they just keep on a little more. Like, oh, look who got the lamp of knowledge. It's just like, okay, guys.
So you got your degree from KU, your undergrad,
That's right. Yeah.
and what was your degree in?
So I got a degree in history, and loved it. Loved studying it. It was a lot of fun. So I was one of these people who got sort of sort of went the traditional liberal arts route for undergraduate. So I got out of college having had a great experience with that, and then confronted the opportunity of having to get a job, and was just like, oh, well, huh. Now what do I do? I actually applied to law school and got accepted to a couple different places. And then just weeks before I was supposed to start, I didn't go. I knew that wasn't my path. I'm not sure how I knew, but I did know that wasn't my path. Maybe that was a little nudge, little divine nudge early on saying, you know what, I'll save you some trouble. I know you want to do something productive, but just that's not necessarily your path. So I ended up sort of pulling out of the law school thing. And then just kind of my dad gave me an opportunity to work for him for a couple years. And I discovered I had a real interest in computer science and software development. So I ended up going back to school to get a master's degree in computer science. So that ended up being my first career. So when I
Did that right up until you went to seminary?
That's right. Yeah. I did that for 20 years.
That's a long career.
Yeah. So yeah, the seminary and ordained ministry is definitely a second half of life journey.
Round two.
Yes, this is definitely very different from what I used to do.
Yeah, you don't say. So tell us about Howard. How did you and Howard meet?
Howard and I met at we were both wanting to do some volunteer work. But I was also interested in doing some work with GLBT organizations, and Youth Services of Tulsa was opening up a new hotline for GLBT youth. And so I thought that would be, I was already doing, volunteer work, working the helpline for the Community Service Council. So I thought it would be, obviously a good match for me to do the same thing, maybe for youth services. And Howard had gotten the same idea that he also wanted to do some work for youth services. And so the two of us met during the training for that particular organization. So we both trained to volunteer for them, and that's how we met.
And how long have you guys been together now?
22 years this October.
My goodness. Hey, that's sneaking up on you. Just a few
I
weeks now.
know it's like coming up. I probably need to plan something. Probably
Okay,
need.
we're gonna shift gears. I have a
Okay.
little um tell us a little bit about your faith journey.
Faith journey. So my faith journey has been probably the thing that sort of dominated that the last half of my IT career and led straight into this. I've been doing IT work for about 10 years and was just at this point in my life where I was feeling this intense longing for something and I didn't know what it was. And I didn't have language to describe it. Like I didn't know why there seemed to be this sort of gap in my life or this sort of empty space in my life. Because I had a great job, I was in a fulfilling relationship. I just didn't, I had a good relationship with my family. I just didn't understand where the emptiness was coming from. It's like, why do I not have a sense of fulfillment? And I came to discover that was really the lack of a spiritual life. There was no spiritual dimension that I was feeding or paying attention to at all. So that's really what started my journey. It started when I was about 12, 13 years ago. And I just really got to the point where I thought, there's something here to be discovered. I just don't know what it is. There were all these options. I was like, I wonder what I am. Like, what is my spirituality? I definitely started off as being spiritual, but not religious. So I thought, well, I'm not really, because I didn't belong to a specific, I wasn't pursuing or developing any kind of knowledge in a specific tradition. I just kind of dabbled. And so, I'd go to the bookstore and I'd go to the religious section and I'd be like, okay, well, Taoism, I wonder what that is. So you pull that off and read a little bit about it. And then I eventually got really interested in Buddhism. Buddhism became kind of the anchor that finally pulled me in and studied that pretty deeply for a couple of years. And really loved it. It spoke to me in a lot of ways, but there was still something that was missing. There was still some gap, and I wasn't sure what it was. And it was the church. And then one day, Howard and I were traveling. We happened to be in Vienna, Austria. We had managed to take a trip over the summer to Europe, and we were visiting as tourists. St. Stephen's Cathedral, which is in the heart of Vienna. It's 1,000-year-old cathedral. And I went in there and I sat down and it just happened. And I just thought, oh, maybe it's the church. And I had a couple relatives that are Episcopalians. And so I called them and asked them what their experience was like in church. And they had wonderful things to say about the Episcopal tradition. And so I came to Trinity. I walked through the doors of Trinity Church, and it just right away, it just felt like home. It really did. And I thought, okay, maybe this is what I'm looking for. I hadn't talked to anyone, hadn't seen anyone. I just walked in and I asked if I could go in and take a look at the church, and was told that I could. And then I asked if there was somebody I could talk to about formation. And they pointed me in the direction of Ed Rolling, who has become, such a good friend. So I went and talked to Ed, and then that's how the journey began. Yeah.
Now, I think I remember early on when you started coming to Trinity, you taught one of the youth classes. Is that right?
J2A, yeah, Journey to Adulthood. Yeah,
How
but
was that?
I got involved. Well, really what I did is I started with the Life of Trinity class, and then that's not that long. It's I don't know, 8 or 10 sessions, something like that. And so after I got done with that, I asked Ed if there was anything else I could do to continue that kind of formation. And he let me enroll in EFM, Education for Ministry. And so that was really where I kind of dug in and really started to spend a lot of time sort of trying to understand the tradition, and got to know folks here through EFM pretty well. And it was out of that I think the idea came up. Well, we need a volunteer to work with the youth. Chris is new to the parish. He seems to really be interested in how we do things here. So let's see if he will volunteer. And so I did. And it was great. It was a really, I wouldn't say that youth ministry is what I'm my skills and aptitudes naturally flow to. It's not like I just think, oh yeah, I'm a natural. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, put me in there. Um, but it did turn out to be a really enriching experience, and it was I grew from it, and it was good to know that that was something that I mean, it was great to see how we do that, how we do youth formation, and I think we have a really great program for that. And so it was really nice to be able to get involved and to do that for a couple of years. But adult formation and is definitely where most of my, I think, aptitudes lead me to.
Tell me about how it went when you proposed to Howard that you wanted to go to seminary.
Yeah. So that was that was actually kind of that kept me up a little bit, because I really had no idea how I would react. Um, so you may know that if you want to pursue ordained ministry, you have to go through a discernment process with the diocese, which is a great idea. And you spend about 8 months in discernment. And the program starts in late summer, early fall, and it goes all the way through to the next spring. So it's kind of like a fall semester, spring semester kind of thing. And there's a deadline to apply. Like, you have to get all your paperwork in by the deadline. And I just woke up one day and realized that the deadline was like 10 days away. Just like, I'm like, I have like less than 2 weeks to get all my stuff in. And I just woke up that morning and turned to Howard and just said, hey, this may sound kind of out of left field, but what do you think about the idea of me becoming an ordained minister? And so he said, okay, well, what does that involve? And I said, well, it doesn't involve anything right away. The first thing I would do is apply to this discernment process with the diocese, and that would take months. So there would be no changes right away. But ultimately, if things turned out to be, if those things all turned out to be pointing in the direction of ordained ministry, I would go to seminary. And he just said, okay. And that was it. He just said, that's cool. He's like, if you truly feel that that's where you're called, I support it. And I was expecting, there to be some trepidation. I was expecting there to be a little bit of resistance there, and there was none. He just said, if that's what you're called to do, I want you to do it. So
that's amazing. What a fantastically supportive partner.
Well, and I really think that, I mean, I took it as a God thing. I just took it as a sign that that kind of a suggestion that would ultimately be that would ultimately invite that much change into our life. I having that accepted with such grace and without any kind of nervousness, at least not yet. I just thought, like I said, I just took it as a God thing. I thought, well, there you go. If the anxiety and fear isn't present here, if this isn't the big roadblock, if this isn't the big hurdle to jump over, then there isn't one.
So then you eventually chose to go to Virginia Theological Seminary.
That's right.
And how did that affect things for you guys?
That made it more complicated, but here's the thing. So we really had two choices. We could go to Washington, basically Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., or we could have gone to Austin at Seminary of the Southwest. And Seminary of the Southwest is an awesome school, and most Oklahoma clergy that I know go there for formation. That's where they go to school, and it makes sense. They've got a great program. The financial support is really generous, and it's 7 hours from Tulsa. So it's very manageable. And Virginia Theological Seminary is less manageable. But I felt like part of the call to seminary was to become a little bit more uncomfortable than the decision to go to Southwest would have made me. In other words, there seemed to be something about the decision that should involve stretching more. I have lived my life being pretty comfortable, and it was probably time for me to be a little less comfortable. To feel like the ground under my feet wasn't quite as firm as it usually feels here at home. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to be challenged that way. And
What do you think that that will bring to your ministry?
well, it certainly makes you feel more, when you start talking about, welcoming the stranger, when you go someplace where you don't know anyone, and where you are the stranger, it makes you feel like, okay, well, this is kind of important, right? I mean, it's an important priority. You suddenly realize what it feels like to be somebody who's maybe a little bit on the outside.
Now, unfortunately, you joined us in the middle of the pandemic, so you haven't had a chance really to be among the people, as it were, as Father Chris.
Right.
But thinking back to your time with your parish when you were in seminary, um, how did that whole relationship building or lack thereof work in a parish in the Northeast versus the way you know it to work at Trinity as a parishioner?
So the parish I served in seminary was in Maryland. It was a little town called Tacoma Park, and in the parish it was wonderful. It was a wonderful little parish, but it was very different from what I was used to here in Oklahoma. It was it was very it was extremely social justice oriented, right? To the point where that was the primary concern of the parish. It was really social justice and how the parish functions as a social justice resource for the community. And so whenever there was a shooting anywhere, they would wear orange stoles to protest gun violence, and they would then typically organize a group to go up to the Capitol and to try to talk to lawmakers about legislation that would reduce gun violence. And that was something that was very much at the heart and soul of that parish. And so so serving there was really it was really about where you fall on social justice issues and how you conceive of yourself as participating in social justice causes. And I was learning liturgy and worship, right? I was learning pastoral care. I was learning how to sit with people and do healing prayer. I was really focused on what it meant to be church. And they were largely focused on what it meant to be a social justice organization. And so bridging that difference was something that turned out to be really enriching, I think, for all sides.
In light of what some would say is the radical love of Jesus, some think that it's a partisan issue if we talk about social justice stuff in this part of the country. Others say that it's just what Jesus would do. Were you able to grapple with that issue a little bit there? And if so, what do you feel as if you might be bringing back to Tulsa?
What I found more often than not was because we were right on the doorstep of Washington, D.C., the people in the parish were much more interested in using the tools and levers of conventional political authority than conventional political influence to make change. So they weren't really that interested in making change through a vision that was founded in gospel ethics. They were interested in change that was embedded in an idea of community values that really would exist, whether we were talking about it within the context of a church or whether we were doing it in the context of some other organization. Because even though the church itself identified as a strong social justice church, when you asked people what the foundation or where that came from, it almost always became a conversation about politics. It was almost never a conversation about faith. So that was an opportunity to say, hey, well, what if this was a faith conversation and not a policy conversation? How does this relate to your personal faith as opposed to your personal policy preferences, I guess is one way to put it. No one talks about that in their context. They don't do sermons. They don't do discussions. They don't sit around and ask themselves about, questions about what it's like to have a faith that has an expectation of God bringing about great change in our lives. They think they do. They think that all comes from them.
And that they don't necessarily feel that God is working through them. They just think that it's humanity that's making the change.
From what I understood, or the way I understood what was happening, is they were so used to relying on themselves. They were so used to relying again on the conventional notions of influence and change making, that the idea that God, if God so chose, could remake the world just wasn't part of their imagination. Like their theological imagination did not embrace the idea that at some point God may very well remake this world again, based on a radically different vision and based on a radically different set of ideals than what are typically at play in the world we live in today. And I guess that was the thing that I wanted to work on with them, and that was the thing that I brought back with me here, is whenever we want to work on changing the world, like if that's really the thing that we're passionate about, that as Christians, we have this incredibly rich and incredibly powerful theological framework to work from, and it can really fire up our imagination in a way that can connect what we do in church, what we do in worship, what we do in liturgy, what we do in scripture study with the actions we're taking out in the world. And when you can connect your actions in the world with your theological tradition and your theological imagination and your theological understanding, I think that's when it really becomes, for me at least, that's where it becomes really transformational.
What else would you say is integral to your core beliefs?
I was kind of thinking through that very question about what it is that is at sort of the core of my my vision on this. And I think that for me, when I came across the idea of, so when we think about God as being our creator, and we think about us living in a created world, when we think about living in a cosmos that's been created by God, and if we take seriously the idea that we are created in the image of God, that means that we all have some kind of divine spark. We all have some kind of spirit resident within us that looks and feels like our creator, right? So we bear the stamp of our creator. And if that's true, then that means we can also be very creative beings. It means we are probably at our essence be very creative beings. And so we're called to be co-creators with God. We're called to be agents in this world that create in a way that would be consistent with the way that God created, right? The idea that the things that we are going to work on are going to be for the benefit and the stewardship and the care of the rest of creation. Right. So that I would say at the core of my theological understanding is this idea that we are called to be co-creators with God, and that we're meant to be harmonizing influences. And so when we come up against the forces of chaos, when we come up against the forces of destruction and violence, we are creative creatures that are meant to bring some kind of order out of that chaos in a way that makes everything more fruitful, and that makes everything that gives everything the ability to flourish more. It puts us in a position to being responsible for ourselves, but in a way that I hope is very reflective of the way that God would have us build the kingdom, right? So this idea that the kingdom is a place of flourishing, a place of justice, a place where all are loved and all are supported and all are uplifted. If that's really our vision, and if we know that the world we live in isn't there yet, then we need a way to stay grounded and rooted that keeps us positive, keeps us moving forward, keeps us from being cynical, keeps us from turning on one another as we continue to march forward. In other words, we're all moving towards kingdom values, not towards worldly values.
You have thought about that a little bit, huh?
I asked one of the people in the parish, I said, do you ever get tired of hearing sermons or hearing messages around, what is virtuous action in the world, or how can we behave virtuously? And she just kind of paused and looked at me and she said, I never get tired of talking about, she's like, no, I never get tired about talking about our values as a community. She's like, because I think we need to be reminded constantly of who we are. And I thought, you know what, I think that's true. I think we're very forgetful creatures, and we need to be reminded of who we are as often as we can be. And if we think that we are God's children, if we conceive of ourselves as God's children, if we conceive of ourselves as being the beloved co-creators that exist in a universe created for us by a loving God, and if we believe that we are called to work towards the establishment and creation of systems that reflect God's priorities of justice and care and love, it doesn't hurt to be reminded of that.
Thanks. So what we're going to do now is switch gears, go quick fire right before we end. Okay?
Okay.
So I'm just going to ask you some easy peasy things. What is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh, what is my favorite food? I like a lot of food. We'll just say that.
You and me both.
Yeah, so I would say right now, I just recently rediscovered Shock Hats at 41st and Sheridan.
Oh yeah.
So right now, their Lebanese food is kind of at the top of the list.
That's some good food over there.
There is some good food over there.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? I'd like to come up with something really, deeply intellectual or something, but I'm not going to. It's going to be Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. We're just going to go with that.
I mean, that is not a bad choice at all.
No.
All right, favorite song?
Probably anything from the early years of REM, sort of my college alternative fave.
Was that Losing My Religion? Was that REM?
Well, that was later REM. That was later.
Okay.
That's not the favorite.
Color. What's your favorite color?
Green.
Okay, just straight up green. Kelly green, olive green.
Yeah, green, which is good because ordinary time, our liturgical color is green, so I get to enjoy it most of the year.
Okay, vacation destination. Where would you go if you could pick anywhere?
I'm really partial to Hawaii. Hawaii is gorgeous.
Do you have a favorite actor or actress?
Not off the top of my head. I wouldn't say that I have any favorite. I just take that back. So again, back to my nerd credentials. Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard. You get into the big debate about, who's better, Jean-Luc Picard or Captain Kirk. I'm a Picard guy. I just think Jean-Luc was definitely a Renaissance person.
City. If you could choose any city in the world, this is your final question. What city would you choose? Whether it's to vacation or to live, why would you choose the city that you choose?
Either vacation or to live. That's a really good question. It would be hard to live. It would be really hard to not live here. I'll just say that. I've lived in Tulsa my entire life. I really love this place. And, when I was growing up here, there was stuff about it that I thought, oh man, whatever, this place isn't, progressive enough, or it's not, it doesn't have enough culture, whatever. It actually has everything that it has met every need that I've ever had. But I think unless something really big changes, Tulsa's going to be the place I'm going to live. But as far as vacation goes, I have to say the one town that just was really just unbelievable in terms of just the quality of life and just almost this fairy tale quality was the town of Amalfi on the coast of Italy. It's very close to the island of Capri. And, Amalfi is a place where you get up and you go outside and you go to a restaurant and you sit down and the salad that you're eating is coming from the garden that is out beside the restaurant. And then you get the clams and linguine, and they've made the linguine by hand, and the clams they just pulled out of the water like that morning or the day before. And then you finish your meal, and the limoncello they serve, which you don't have to pay for because they always give it to you as a digestive or whatever they call it, is made from the lemons that they are growing on the lemon trees surrounding their restaurant. And that's like every meal you have there. So it's like,
so difficult. How
oh
did
my
you
gosh.
stand it?
So I would go back there in a heartbeat. And Capri's pretty, it's like that too.
Can you take me with you next time you go?
Yes.
Okay.
Pack a bag.
Is there any parting word you want to give us before I let you go?
Only that I'm tremendously grateful and happy to be back at Trinity, and thrilled that it worked out that I could come here and serve as your curate. It really was kind of when I found out that this was a possibility, I couldn't believe it, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. So I'm just thrilled to be here.
We're pretty thrilled to have you.
It was a dream come true for us. I'll just tell you that much. It just really was a dream come true for us. So
it's mutual. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. Hopefully we'll give everybody a little bit more idea of who you are and what makes you tick.
Great.